I want to present in a few slides what molecular diagnosis means and how we can use this to improve diagnosis in food allergy. I want to emphasize on the very beginning that all the in vitro diagnosis is only part of the full diagnosis in food allergy, which also my previous speaker has been talked about, I guess, because my Spanish is not good. But anyhow, the patient history is the cornerstone of a diagnosis. You have to sit with the patient, you have to ask where the symptoms occur when eating which type of food. And based on that, you go for a selected skin prick testing, which is easy to be done, which can be done within 15 to 20 minutes. And then you can use the IgE antibody test using extracts or single allergens, as I will explain in a few minutes. And you take the blood and you detect the IgE antibodies in your serum. And then, of course, the gold standard is the provocation, either in an open form or in a double-blind placebo-controlled food challenge. So, having said this, the IgE testing is part of the game. Oh, it doesn't seem to work. Anyhow, sorry. Having said this, I just want to highlight again, molecular diagnosis is the use of individual allergens, which is proteins in our case, for allergen diagnosis, and it should replace extracts. Why replacing total extracts? If we compare those two, then we have to say we use a defined amount of extract for skin prick testing or for IgE testing, but these extracts are not well standardized. They have a high variability. They vary from batch to batch, and they may have low or high concentrations of individual allergens, which are more important or less important, and there is other substances in these extracts as well. And some of these proteins may get degraded during processing, so you may not find these allergens which are relevant in your extract anymore. These are all the points why in some cases why you should go for a defined amount of an allergen. Either you spike your extract with allergens or you use individual allergens. And it's also an advantage if you use individual allergens, you have a defined production purification condition, and you know what the amount of the allergen is in your test system. So this, I think, should be an improvement. But is this really an improvement? So let's discuss in the next few minutes. The current situation, and this is the current situation, will be the future one. I want to emphasize again that the in vitro allergy diagnosis provides you the evidence of sensitization, of the presence of IgE antibody in your system. It does not always correlate with the clinical picture, and this you always have to bear in mind, and you have to go back and see whether there is really a correlation with clinical symptoms, no matter whether we talk about extracts or allergens. But when we go to the extract-based in vitro diagnosis, we see that they are performing quite well. They have a high sensitivity depending on the source, between 70 to 100%, but the specificity, as you can see, varies dramatically, between 40 to 70%. And that's why still the golden standard is the double-blind placebo-controlled food challenge. So the question is, how can we improve this in vitro diagnosis? Is molecular testing an option? There are some examples where it might really be a benefit. There is still lots of improvement to be done in the future. Or do we want to improve cellular assays like the basophil activation test? So let's go through a few examples now. And just briefly mentioning also our guidelines coming from the European Academy of Allergy and Clinical Immunology. These were based on a systematic review, and you can see here the reference where I took the figures out for the sensitivity and specificity testing. So, if we go for individual food allergens for diagnosis, they may help us to determine the range of cross-reactivity. Cross-reactivity means IgE antibodies specific for one allergen, but they recognize also highly homologous allergens. You can establish allergen panels per food, per kiwi fruit, per hazelnut, per peanut. You can hopefully identify severity markers, allergens that predict a more severe clinical picture as compared to other allergens. And in the future, they may also help to work towards a patient-tailored immunotherapy. So this could be the outlook. What is the limitations on the other hand? Again, having said the same applies for the extract-based in vitro diagnosis as for the allergen-specific diagnosis. There is sensitization with and without clinical relevance, and it's you as a clinician that you have to find out what the relevant IgE picture correlates with the clinical symptoms. There are some allergen panels around. Some of them are complete. Some of them are still awaiting additional allergens that may be important. And, of course, the sensitization patterns may vary in different patient groups, depending on the exposure, starting with different pollens around in the environment and causing cross-reactive food allergic reactions, different dietary habits, different food production habits. So all these feeds into different recognition patterns. So having overloaded all of this right now, is this an extremely explosion of different allergen testings, or does it help us in improving diagnosis? So let's consider this again in the next minutes. At present, we have more than 700 allergens listed in the official allergen nomenclature database, which is the database where you can retrieve the name and, of the allergen, and where you can find some additional information. And just briefly, again, going back, food allergens belong to a limited number of protein families. And these protein families are only 2% of all the known protein families. We don't know why these proteins exert an allergenic, immunogenic activity, but that's what we know so far. If allergens have been characterized well and do show relevant parameters by in vitro testings in a number of patients, then you can submit your allergen, your new allergen, to the IOS allergen database, where they are being evaluated, and then they get a name. And the name, just briefly, the nomenclature goes that you have the genus of the species, then the species name in a one-letter code, and then you get a number. And if we take peanut as an example, then you have the name, the Latin name, Arachis hypogea. So it's ARA-H, and the first detected or identified allergen is ARA-H1. So I would like now to discuss or to show you some examples where we do get some information out of allergen testing, of molecular testing, and I would like to start with peach allergy. Of course, these data are coming from Europe, but they may be familiar also in your area. So far, in peach, we have 4 identified allergens. One is the BETV1 homolog, which is a protein of 17 kD, which comes from the BETV1 family. It's very closely related to the birch pollen major allergen. Then we have a taumatin-like protein, and we have the PRUP3, a non-specific lipid transfer protein, which is a very small but very robust protein, and it stays in our intestine for quite some time until it gets absorbed. So this is a protein with highly correlating with clinical symptoms, and we assume that this is also due to its high stability. And then we have the prophyline, another protein which is well known as an allergen among the pollen, but also among the food allergens. So how is this pattern? What can we read out of these allergens? And going back to data from patient studies within single countries, but also across Europe studies, then we found out that the PRUP1 sensitization, of course, correlates with the birch pollen-associated fruit allergies. Usually, it's the birch pollen allergy that starts first, and then the symptoms occur with eating peach, but also with apples or other fruits from the Rosaceae family. And it's usually evoking rather the mild symptoms, the local oral allergy syndrome. And it's only predominant, of course, where birch trees are. So the more north or Central Europe you are, the more likely you have this type of sensitization. But the more you go to the south, the less likely you have a PROP1 sensitization. But on the contrast, the PROP3, the LTP sensitization is predominant in Spain and in Italy, in southern Europe. And this is linked mostly with more severe clinical symptoms, also getting intestinal problems, but even getting generalized symptoms. And then PROP2 is rather a minor allergen, whereas the PROP4, the prophyllene, again, correlates rather with mild symptoms. And in this case, the sensitization is more frequent in Southern Europe as compared to Northern Europe. And this is maybe linked with grass pollen prophyllene sensitization. So, another example, soy allergy. Soy consumption is supposed to be a healthy a part of a healthy diet and is propagated, but it also may induce severe food allergic reactions, especially when we talk about soy milk, which is a highly enriched protein concentrate and uptake of proteins. And so far, we have listed up to 7 soy allergens, but I would like to focus on the GLIAM4, the GLIAM5 and 6. The GLIAM4 is, again, the BETV1 homologue, but then we have the seed storage proteins coming into this pattern, which is the 7S globulin and the 11S globulin. Again, seed storage proteins are highly enriched in seeds, or in plant embryos, if I may call them so, for the plant to develop, to get energy of this. And these seed storage proteins cause allergic problems in patients, not only in the seeds, not only in the soy, but also in the nuts, as you will see in a minute. So let's focus on those 3 different allergens. And I would like to briefly show you the results of one study we performed in our country. We had 20 patients, and they had anaphylactic reactions after soy uptake, and this was usually the soy milk, so this highly protein-enriched drink. And when you do the IgE testing with the soy extract, only 3 out of the 20 were positive. But when you did the molecular testing, we could increase the number of the positive reactions to 15 out of the 20. So what was happening? So since Austria is located in the center of Europe, Central Europe, Middle Europe, we do have lots of birch trees around. And those patients were mostly birch pollen allergics, and they had a birch pollen associated soy allergy. So in this case, the BETV1 homologue was the culprit allergen. We could see the IgE sensitization nicely. And we had another patient, the last one, who was sensitized to these seed storage proteins, and he was a soy and peanut allergic. So in this case, you would quite easily see that it helps us in taking or formulating dietary recommendation. In this case, it means in the first case, avoid the soy milk uptake or consumption. In the other case, it's avoidance of soy and peanut, which is the most important message here. So, and for the molecular diagnosis, in this case, we do know that the soy extract used for in vitro testing lacks the BETV1 homologue. It's degraded. So if you do the testing with the soy extract, do an additional test with the soy GLIAM4, then you get the picture so far we have in hands. In this case, this is an exception for the BETV1 homologues in food allergy. This can induce also severe reactions, at least to the current knowledge. And in addition, the sensitization to these seed storage proteins, like the 7S and 11S from soy, this correlates with severe food allergic reactions. And this has been already shown also by a German group and also by a Japanese group. So this, again, is helpful, I think, in formulating diagnosis and going to dietary recommendation. Another story is the kiwi fruit allergy. At least in Europe, and I think it's the same in Mexico, we didn't know kiwi fruits until the late 70s, 80s of the last century. And then people were happy to have this nice fruit available, full of vitamins, and they have, again, part of a healthy diet. But then the data came up with kiwi fruit allergy. And people were interested in what the culprit allergens might be in this kiwi fruit. And when we have a look at the green kiwi fruit, Actinidia deliciosa, you can see a long list of allergens that has been identified so far. But we don't need all these allergens for helping us in vitro diagnosis. That's why I want to concentrate here on the active one, the actinidine, which is a cysteine protease and which is special for the kiwi fruit. And then again, we have these old familiar guys, the Betv1 homologue and the profilin, Acti9 and Acti8 and Acti9. We also have the lipid transfer protein, which is a relevant allergen in the peach, but it does not seem to be that relevant in the kiwi fruit as we know so far. So what we do know in several studies that have been performed within EU-funded projects using patient groups from different countries and comparing their sensitization pattern, the first message is that this total kiwi fruit extract to be used for in vitro diagnosis has a low sensitivity, and it seems that it only contains degraded allergens. So the extract does not do a good job so far. We do know that the active one, the actinidine, seems to be a good marker for patients with a single kiwi fruit allergy, with no additional food allergies or fruit allergies. We do further know that if there is birch pollen allergy in some of the patients, and if they react with the Betv1 homologue and the profilin, then this is a marker allergen for polysensitization, and this may have a clinical relevance, but it also may not have a clinical relevance. And we do think that the kiwi fruit allergen panel is still incomplete. Just a note, in addition to this, you may have heard that the golden kiwi fruit is different. So there is a new variety on the market, and well, actually there are more varieties in the market, but you may have seen this golden flesh kiwi fruit, which lacks or has very low levels of Acti1. And patients sensitized or reactive to Acti1 within the green kiwi fruit can sometimes stand or tolerate the gold kiwi fruit. So it's not only a message of the proteins that are expressed, it's also a message of the quantity of the proteins that are in these foods. Now let's go to hazelnut allergy. Hazelnut is also consumed quite frequently. Again, it's a number of allergens that have been identified, but again, I would like to concentrate only on those two. And in addition, again, we have the PR10, the Betv1 homologue, as the core1. So the core9, again, is a seed storage protein, and the core14 is a 2S-albumin, also belonging to this superfamily of seed storage proteins. These are, while the core9 is a bigger protein, the 2S-albumin is a small protein of 15 to 16 kD, but they are very stable proteins again. They have a very robust structure, and we do think they are abundant in these nuts, and they also persist in our intestinal tract for a longer time as other proteins. And this may also be one of the explanations why they exert allergic reactions, induce allergic reactions. So there are several studies around. I just picked through 3 out of those. There is a Dutch study where children and adults with clinical diagnosed hazelnut allergy were tested and compared to those with, that were sensitized but had no objective symptoms. And the outcome of this study was the core1, again the birch pollen homologue, had a high frequency in specific IgE in all groups. But again, the correlation with objective symptoms was rather low, or no correlation. But On the other hand, the sensitization to the core 9 and the core 14 correlated quite well with objective symptoms. And again, if we go for the non-specific lipid transfer protein, which is relevant in peach, there was a low frequency observed of sensitization in the core 8, and there is no good data around whether this really induces severe symptoms in hazelnut allergic patients. There was another one, a study coming from Belgium, where again children and adults with objective symptoms and infants with atopic dermatitis and tolerant to hazelnut were tested. And again, the study highlighted that the sensitization to this core 14, as mentioned before, correlated well with the objective symptoms. The sensitization to another seed storage protein, the core 11, was rather low. The core 8 was low, and the propylene and the carbohydrates, which usually give IgE values which are of no clinical relevance, were rare. So, in addition to this, there is a new study published by Kirsten Beyer and another Danish study by Esme Eller, and they wanted to see whether the IgE levels directed against single allergens could help and could correlate with the positive outcome of double-blind placebo-controlled food challenges. And of course, these are preliminary data, but I think they could help to maybe downsize the number of food challenges that have to be performed for the sake of the patient. So maybe this could be a tool that could help in making decisions in the future. But having said this, of course, this needs further studies. But I think it's promising. So Kirsten Beyer published recently that IgE, specific IgE directed against core 14, this 2S albumin, with a level of higher than 47 kilounits, which is a lot, is in 90% predictive for a positive peanut outcome of a peanut, hazelnut challenge. Sorry, this was a typo I have to correct. But because I mixed or included also the peanut data, because in the Kirsten Beyer publication there was also the data for peanut, and in this case again it's the 2S albumin, the specific IgE directed against the RAH2, and here she identified a cutoff or a point of 1.6 kilounits per liter as a clear decision point for clinically relevant hazelnut. Sorry, this was the Esme Eller study coming from Denmark, and Kirsten Beyer had 10 times higher levels identified, again 90% being predictive for a positive peanut challenge. So maybe that's the future way where we could compare food challenges and IgE levels and see whether we can at least get a hold of more than 90% of the patients and predict a positive outcome and maybe reduce the number, as I said, of food challenges. So, having said this and having shown you the positive examples we have in hand so far, we sometimes, we try to identify marker allergens, meaning allergens that that are sensitization markers with a clinical relevance. Of course, it's always a correlation because we are not allowed to do at the moment double-blind placebo-controlled food challenges with single allergens for regulatory reasons. So, summing up what I've said so far, in peach we do know that the PRUP3 is a marker for clinical relevant peach allergy. The PRUP1 is rather for the oral allergy syndrome, inducing more the mild local symptoms. In soy, we have 3 potential candidates as marker allergens. It's the GLIME4, the BETV1 homologue, if it's the protein-enriched food like the soy milk, and the seed storage protein, the GLIME4 and the 5 and 6 as marker for soy allergy. And in kiwi fruit, we do have the ACT1 as a marker for true kiwi fruit mono-sensitization and kiwi fruit allergy. In hazelnut, I have shown you that core 14 and core 9 seem to be quite good markers for hazelnut allergy. I did not touch the subject on peanut, but this will be done by Gideon Leck in the afternoon. So far, the data point out that the 2S albumins, RH2 and 6, are the correct, are the more important allergens predicting peanut allergy, followed by RH1 and 3. And as a negative example, the cross-reactive carbohydrates, we are highly abundant in plant food. There, the IgE directed against these carbohydrates is usually of no clinical relevance. So far about the in vitro testing using the serum. I did IgE as a readout. What about skin prick testing? As I have said before, the extracts to be used, especially if we talk about food extracts, they can be highly unreliable because some of the allergens are degraded. So that's why in many cases the clinician does a prick-to-prick test, pricks the food, the culprit food, and pricks it onto the skin, and it works. It works nicely. But the question is, can we improve that? And as a proof of concept, there have been studies performed with single allergens, either coming from a natural source or being produced as recombinant allergens. And so one is the Betty-1 homologue from the apple. The purified recombinant MALDI-1 was tested, and it could be titrated in the patient nicely, seeing the reaction going down, the lower the concentration, with a detection limit as low, this should be 0.2 microgram per ml. This was a problem with my PowerPoint. Then we do have data now, recent data on MALDI-1, which has been produced under good manufacturing practices, because this was a study using this protein also for a desensitization trial. And again, it goes down to 50 microgram per ml in the skin prick test. I missed the MALDI-4. One line above, with a detection limit of 0.2 microgram per ml, and this was published by Désirée Larenas-Linnemann, who you might quite well know here. And there is also data around about the purified peanut allergens RH1, 2, 3, and 6. So these are examples that it works, that it helps us, and it can be safe. But so far, it seems that this is not an option for routine testing, because we need companies that are really going the effort for approval of each single allergen, and this costs a lot of money. So it would be a nice idea, but so far there is no good hope that we can test all these allergens in a routine setting. But we do have natural proteins that can be tested, and the company does provide you, if you are interested in this. There is a natural PRUP3 coming from the peach, highly enriched peach extract containing only this LTP. So this is available for skin prick testing. And in addition, there is a propylene coming from the date. This is also something you can use. So, of course, there are also the cellular tests that you can do. You use either the basophils or the mast cells from the patient, or you use a cell line, strip the cell line and add the patient's serum into the system, and then you can add the allergens and titrate this and see the reaction. So this works, but the question is, and it gives you quite good additional information, especially if you use the basophils directly from the patient. So it has sometimes good, better evidence to be highly correlated with clinical symptoms if you take it from the patient. But still, the question is it applicable for routine food allergy diagnosis? And I think there is still a way to go if we can say yes or no. At the moment, it's an add-on. It's been used in several clinics, but for routine testing, I think there needs improvement. Okay. And then just having a word on IgG testing, because this is around. There is also the option that you test for IgG, but this is useless for clinical diagnosis. Just stressing or emphasizing again IgG and especially IgG4 testing for food allergy diagnosis is of no clinical relevance, and this is also exemplified in all current guidelines, either on an international or on a national level. And that gives me just the introduction to the European guidelines on food allergy, because they have been produced and published last year in 2014. So that's the first example of a European joint activity, on which within the EAACI we are quite proud that we managed to do this. You can see the different topics. They are not, it's not a complete list, but the different topics listed here that have been especially discussed and put the knowledge together and coming to recommendations. So it comprised anaphylaxis, not only induced by foods, but anaphylaxis in general. Then the food allergy and anaphylaxis guidelines on diagnosis and management. Then aspects on primary prevention of food allergy, which my next speaker will talk in more detail about. And also aspects on health-related quality of life measurements. Just to show you an example, they have been also published in allergy in different issues, but you can also access them on the internet, on the EAACI website. And what I just wanted, I'm sorry, I have to apologize, the pointer doesn't work. I just zoomed out the recommendations on the determination of sensitization to food in relation to component-resolved diagnosis or molecular testing. If you go down to the fourth line from the bottom, it says where skin prick test and specific IgE tests are inconclusive, component-resolved diagnosis, if available, may provide additional diagnostic information. And I think that's the point where we would like to go with further studies to emphasize this and bring new information and improve that. Again, highlighting unconventional testing, including IgG testing, is of no worth and is not recommended in terms of diagnostic approach. And here I am now with my conclusions. Molecular diagnosis provides additional information. It gives you an idea about cross-reactivity. It can give you information on marker allergens, but again, you have to view or to judge this in relation with the patient history. It helps to improve the patient management by giving dietary advice. And in the future, there are trials going on with individual immunotherapy. So let's see what comes out of these immunotherapy trials. Of course, the application of molecular diagnosis depends on the allergen source. There is not always molecular testing available. And the last point is we need well-designed studies, and we need the financial support of well-designed studies to assess the clinical relevance of different tests and their performance. And with this, I have my disclosure here. I want to thank again for the invitation to come here. And I want to highlight just a few events that EAACI is having in the near future. There is the annual Congress in Barcelona coming in June. We have a food allergy school in Spain. There is a pediatric allergy meeting and a molecular meeting in fall. And with this, I want to thank you for your attention. Thank you.